I think just that we get so many comments in the Facebook group that I'm on quite frequently, pretty much all the time. And a lot of them, I think, come from exactly what you said, just a little more education in the philosophy itself, and understanding this goes far beyond just a list of books, far beyond just narration. And I would, my heart really is for people to have more confidence in themselves.
Yes.
As they use Charlotte Mason and of course A Gentle Feast, which is what we love so much, and that they would have that confidence. And I think the confidence comes really from reading the volumes yourselves and not being intimidated. That's why you and I discussed that we want to do this, because we don't want people to be intimidated by the volumes. And so I hope people really watch this, even if you haven't read it yet, and then maybe go back and read it after listening. And I think it would just make everybody feel so much more comfortable in their daily implementation.
Yeah. And, there are, 5 other volumes before this one, obviously, right? It's volume 6. And the reason we chose this one, I really do feel like it is a great overview of her entire philosophy and approach. The other ones can be more practical or focused on specifics. So even in the introduction that we're going to talk about today, like if you just read the introduction, like you will have a very firm understanding of kind of where she's going, because she really highlights the basic foundational principles that she grows and builds upon in the rest of the book. So, just spending the time investing in this, I think will really help. So you can get it free online. I believe you linked to that before, but we'll do that in the comments too. So you don't have to go buy anything. This is my original pink copy of.
That's the same one.
That all the pages have fallen out. So yeah, it's a pretty bad shape.
Loved. It's well loved.
Yeah, I've read this, multiple times. But Rachel Leibowitz, who does the Charlotte Mason Plenary, has come out with an annotated edition. I believe she's in volume 6 and volume 1 so far. So she was so gracious to give me a copy of this at the homeschool convention. But so it has the regular size text in it, but I love that it has these margins so that I can write in. I feel like the other one, there's no room to write anything. And yeah, I know. And then I do really like the annotations. Charlotte Mason does have big vocabulary. So there's some words that, I was always pulling out my phone. I felt like every time I was reading, okay, who's this guy? What's this movement she's talking about? What does this word mean? So the annotated version kind of has like the little notes on the side that kind of really helpful too. And you can get this on Amazon, or you can get it at cmplenary.com. But I wanted to give a shout out for Rachel for graciously leaving to that. It was nice to be able to read it in this and not have all the pages falling out every time I tried to read it.
Yes, I know, that's mine. I think I'm going to have to eventually get another copy. Maybe I need to order hers, because I'm running out of room to make notes in mine. So.
Yeah. And I'm trying to do it where I can see people's comments as they put them, but I don't know if I'll be able to see them in real time. So if we can't, we'll go back and read through your comments and answer your questions when we're finished here. And maybe one of these days we'll be really high-techy and cool and be able to figure all that out. But right now we're just happy that you can actually do this. So this was the last volume that Charlotte Mason put together. It was right before her death. She was 79 years old when she wrote this, which just blows my mind. I mean, what a
we still have more time, Julie. We're not.
No, maybe my retirement years, right? That I can write my book. So again, it's important to know kind of this was in the 1920s. I can't remember exact year. I should look that up. But she's writing this after World War I, and so you'll see so she wrote it in 1921, and then it was published after her death in 1925. So this is after World War I, and of course, England saw a lot of devastation from that, a lot of loss of life. And so everyone's kind of questioning what in the world just happened, right? Mm-hmm. And so she's looking at this and kind of saying, okay, I see these deficits in the way that we're educating. Has that led to kind of this thinking that she saw, not just at home in England, but specifically like in Germany, that was leading to this? And I just can't even imagine if she would have lived to see World War II, right, and the destruction that happened there. But we can see how this educational pattern, these thoughts, right? The importance of the thoughts that we think and the thoughts that our kids are being fed can lead to destructive thinking if you look back at, especially in World War II, right? So I think it's all fascinating. So I just want to kind of give you a little history and a context of how she's writing this, because she starts off, so the introduction really is like the thesis for this whole book. Right. This is the philosophy that I'm going to break down and describe for you. I want you to understand, I think this philosophy of education, this way of educating will solve this national problem, this worldwide problem we have, right, of kind of people thinking kind of the way that they've been thinking, and some of the error and the evil that, I would say evil that's come out of that, right? So she's saying, you know, the philosophy that I've been working on is an answer to this problem, but it has much more to it than that. And so I'm going to kind of explain in this introduction how she got her philosophy, you know, where'd it come from? Charlotte Mason just like struck by lightning one day and like, oh, here's this great philosophy. And then kind of like, okay, here are the overarching principles, like I've said. So if you have a copy, great. If you want to follow along with us, if not, like Shay said, you just listen and then go back and read it for yourself later. But as we start here at the beginning, she's kind of, again, like I said, saying, okay, what kind of education have we been giving people? And for her, it was she sees it very focused on training, the physical beings, and then vocational training. And she's saying that's not really, those are important things for sure, but that it does not make an education. That does not make a person knowledgeable. So what were your thoughts on all that, Shay?
I think that what I just love about even in the beginning is that she's reacting, like you said, to what people are actually dealing with in their lives, and it's so practical. And that's where she starts. Like, okay, you're anxious, right? For your patient. So where do we start? And so I think where she's talking about that it's not just physical, like not just the activities, but we have to back up from that to the thought. And she sort of bookends this whole introduction with that. What are our goals? If our goals are just that physical sort of education, then the activities, then we're okay. But that's not what our goals are. And so she starts out by talking about what an educated person actually is. And then she ends the whole introduction by what an educated person actually is.
It's like she knew how to write an essay or something.
I know, like a 5-paragraph, really good essay with the bookended bottom. I know.
Amazing.
And that we would learn that from reading in her writings instead of giving a lesson, right? Which I think is
or a formula, right?
Yeah. What we try to keep, you know, people who even get worried about, oh my goodness, a language arts education, how are they going to learn to write? Well, by reading well-written things. So even just this introduction starts to teach that concept.
That's a really good point. I love it on page 2 where she says, the people themselves begin to understand and to clamor for an education which shall qualify their children for life rather than for earning a living.
Oh, yes.
And I asked that question all the time, right? Well, like, let's prepare my child for college, or you know, are they be able to get a job someday? And it's like, the answer is yes, but also, more importantly, we're preparing them for life, because you are educating an entire person and you are training the way that they think rather than just kind of filling them with information here. And again, she talks about the problem in Germany here. She says the symptoms have been traced in the thoughts of people for 3 or 4 generations. And I just think about, you know, she talks about the influence of Darwin and the thinking of the survival of the fittest, and the influence of, there was another one, Locke leading to the French Revolution. The way the philosophies of the time really do affect the thoughts, and then that leads to, in these cases, really horrible things happening, right? But it's so relevant for today, right? And we so see that today.
Yes. And when you're thinking practically, like I think where sometimes a hurdle comes is people are saying, just tell me what to do with my kids in my
Right.
day.
Right.
And she is very practical. But thinking back, like you're talking about on the influence of the thoughts that you're putting into your child's minds, the ideas, it is practical to go back to this. What are we being influenced by in this modern era, and what do we want to influence our children? What kind of thought do we want to influence our children? And when we start that back, it does impact the practical, which she does address later on. But I love that it's more than just do this thing, do this thing, do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Why
Mm-hmm.
are we doing these things?
Yeah. She says, and I don't think I underlined it in the new one, about, Germany's downfall started when they made their national curriculum utilitarian.
Yeah.
And that's focusing on the practical rather than what is beautiful.
Yes. And if we just do that, then we don't have children who are able to think for themselves.
Right.
That don't have they're not able to assimilate, like she talks about in here, assimilate lots of thoughts and compare that to truth. It's all
Exactly. Yes.
on the practical. And so when we think, okay, what do I do with my kids today? If we haven't gone all the way back to these concepts that you and I are discussing about more than the practical, then all we're doing is just checking off a checklist. And we get frustrated, we get
Mm-hmm.
fact, we add in more and more and more and more instead of going back to the thought that is the beautiful. And of course, the practical there, but not just the practical.
Right. Yeah. And I hear that. And I know there's definitely seasons in my life where I've done this, like, oh, we're just doing reading math. We're just doing the basics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's definitely seasons for that. But when you just go boil it down to the practical, you're missing so much because you're missing those living ideas that do change your thoughts, that do make a person, right? And the things that are beautiful and make you want to actually learn, like she talks about in here, we'll get to that, like that desire for knowledge doesn't come from just checking off a box.
Right. Right. And going through your checklist every day can make you feel really good. Like, I mean, I'm definitely a checklist person. So I
Mhm.
get it all done. That's a great feeling. But the connections that we make come from the beautiful things combined with the practical things. And when they see that connection there, it really is priceless. And you are training your child for a life, not just
Mhm.
to earn a living, which is, it really, and since I have kids who are out of my homeschool now, graduated and some married and moving on to jobs, I mean, you do start to see that fruit. And that is a
Mhm.
thing. Sometimes you don't think you're going to see it when you're like, there's no way we have time for tea time today. Why do I need to put in poetry? It's just not going to happen. Or why do I need to, those sorts of things. You start to see the fruit of that once they start to move past those ages.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. The difference, right? Yeah. And even my college age kids have said that, that they can see the difference between the way that they kind of think through things and the way some of their other friends in college are just waiting for the teacher to say, okay, this is what's on the test. This is what's
Right.
important,
Yeah.
rather than I want to think about what's important to me and I want to process this and I want to know more. There's that desire for knowledge rather than just, I'm just getting through this so I can get out of here.
Right. Exactly. Or make an A and that's it.
Yeah. Right.
Difference. There's such a difference in that because they're owning their education.
Yeah, so we'll get into that when we get into the practical here. So that's part one. Part one was kind of looking at Germany and some of the philosophies that happened in France and Prussia and et cetera, and just kind of making this point of, okay, this philosophy of education that's just focused on physical training or vocational training is really missing the mark. And we can see that throughout history. And so now I'm offering something different, okay? So now we're moving on to part two. And she's saying that, we want in it, I guess the beginning of part two, she does explain that a little bit. And then she's going to kind of really break apart here the difference in what the teacher does in these traditional models and what a teacher does in Charlotte Mason education and what the student does. So this really comes down to all education is self-education and the child is responsible for their own education. She even says that on page 5. The child, not the teachers, are the responsible persons. They do the work by self-effort. So another important part too is that this is a working philosophy, which I love, right?
Yes. Yes, I feel like that right there, if you can get every person that's interested in Charlotte Mason to grasp that idea, that this is a working philosophy of education. It is not just a list of books. It is not just
Mhm.
okay, but that framework, honestly, that it's a philosophy is what helps me go to bed at night feeling good about what we do.
Mhm. Mhm.
Understand that this is more than just about what we got done today. It's about a philosophy that is overarching for their education and for what
Mhm.
to them. And I feel like if you can grab that, okay, this is more than just, oh, do I want to use this box or this thing or this thing or this thing?
Mhm.
Fill in the blanks, but you're using a working philosophy of education. It's like deep breath.
Yeah.
Okay, this is going to work because it's been proven to work and because it's more than just a thing we're doing or a book we're using.
Yeah.
So that powerful, powerful idea right there for anybody who really wants to educate their children this way.
Right. It's not just because I got this book off this Charlotte Mason book list, or this book says Charlotte curriculum says Charlotte Mason inspired, or whatever it is. It's I understand the philosophy and we are working it out on a daily basis. What you
Yeah.
use to kind of fill in those pieces, and we'll see here later again, it's more important of kind of how they're learning it than necessarily what. Okay, it's the why, that why are we doing this?
Yeah.
That will kind of guide you through the years and keep you going for the long haul here, hopefully. All right, do you have anything else to say on pages 4 and 5 before we move on? Or part 2, I guess. Yeah, part 2. There's a lot more here. Let's talk about it.
I think your page numbers are different than mine.
Oh,
But
are
so
they? Okay, let me look back in the other. Oh, I was hoping they would have the same page numbers, man.
I don't know why some of them changed, but I think my 4 and 5, I can follow you because I think mine are just back ahead one. The only thing I wanted to mention was the statement that she
Oh, you're
said.
right.
I own my page 5, so I think it might be your page 4.
Yeah.
Great thoughts, great events, great consideration, which form the background of our national thought, shall be the content of the education we pass on. And I have in my notes, I wrote that's like the filter. That's like if you're putting whatever you're using, whatever books you're using through this filter, does it contain great thoughts? Does it talk
Mm-hmm.
about great events? Does it include great considerations? That is so much easier than just saying, oh, should I use this book, should I not? I mean, that's a beautiful filter for
Mm-hmm.
what you use to put in front of your children. And so I love that. I love that thought.
Okay, so then if you're in your book, page 5, it starts this section 2 here. And so in that section, again, she's showing kind of the difference, what the teacher's doing and what the student's doing. And she's saying that this theory, this is on page 6 of the pink volume, that this theory has been tested by thousands of children.
Right.
The theory has already been set forth in volumes published at intervals during the last 35 years. So again, people are like, well, does this philosophy actually work? And I'm like, yeah, it's worked for thousands. I mean, this is in 1921. She's saying it's been used for thousands of children. So then for the next 100 years here, it's been used by thousands more children, right?
Yes.
It's not some newfangled thing that just came out of nowhere. And she based it, and we'll kind of go into it where she describes it here, how she got that, how she developed her philosophy. But so yeah, this isn't like some pie in the sky, weirdo, voodoo, hippie, whatever people think.
And what's interesting is we're in cycle 2, so we're doing about the founding fathers, and we're reading a book called The Signers, about the signers of the Constitution. And it's so interesting because one of them yesterday, and I can't remember which one, of course, my daughter probably could, but it said that they were homeschooled through, they were educated through great books at home.
Yes, a lot of the most famous people throughout history were, right?
But made that connection. She said, did they know Charlotte Mason? I'm like, well, wrong time period.
Yeah.
But it was so interesting that you read this, that they were educated by great books at home, and which is what we're doing. So
yeah, that is encouraging, right? Yes, right. And then so she's saying, that they're reading these great books. She says in one term or two, 3,000 pages according to their age. You know, it's a lot. And when you see people like on Instagram who use the Charlotte Mason education, I love it when they stack the books up, you know. And it's not like we're trying to like read more than the kid next door or something like that. But you can see how deep and how amazing that kind of this reading is that they do. And I often get, and then, you know, she talks about that's tested by narration. She'll keep repeating this read and narrate concept throughout this whole introduction. So again, this is the foundational principles here. If you don't understand narration, or if you're new to narration, we'll link to the video or the podcast episode we did on. You have to kind of grasp narration for sure. And I think we just got this question on Facebook like a week or two ago. Like, this just seems like all we do is read.
Yes.
What am I missing here? You know? And
yes.
What did you answer? I don't remember what the other comments were.
Yeah, anytime somebody asks a question like that, I always go back and just ask them, well, how familiar are you with the philosophy and the methods? Because a lot of times people, they really don't even know that there's more for them to learn. It's not that they're intentionally ignorant or anything. They just don't realize that there's more for them to learn. So I really feel like just reading this section would help anybody. I've read this probably 4 times, and this is my 18th year of homeschooling. Even as I read it again yesterday, I'm like, I needed that reminder. I need that reminder that this is tried and true, trusted, or whatever, you know, I might pull out from that time. So my answer was really to try to give a quick understanding of the overarching view of narration. And I also want to encourage anybody who has questions, since we're mentioning that you and I did a podcast on the Charlotte Mason show that I have referred to multiple times, and it's about language arts in a Charlotte Mason education. And it really is an overarching, I'll link it below, an overarching explanation of how does narration, copy work, dictation, reading these books, how does this all tie together so that it all makes sense instead of all we do is read a book and they tell me back and where are the activities?
Right. Yes. And I often say it's like, okay, well, are you doing nature study and handicrafts and folk songs and all these other things that are part of it too? It's not just reading and narrating. So you might just be like, oh, I'm just trying to check off this box. So we're going to just read these books for these subjects and be done. And you're missing the whole beautiful feast as well, because there is so much more than just read and narrate, but that is a huge, huge part of it. And, and she kind of says, tongue in cheek, oh, people have said, mere book learning is rather contemptible. Things are in the saddle and ride mankind. But she's saying, has anyone ever done this on a large scale where they're reading a lot, where they're and they're narrating it, again, is the key. So it's not just, we're going to read through this stack of books. Like, there's other things that you are doing with it. And there's many books on many subjects. She says the delight in the lesson is not from the teacher, but from their lovely, glorious books.
Yes, I love that.
And again, she reiterates this throughout, right? That it's not based on the teacher's personality or the wonderful lesson they came up with or the wonderful unit study that they created and integrated all these subjects or all these like fancy bells and whistles, marks, prizes, punishment, praise, blame, all these other things that, as a public school teacher, I had to use to try to get the kids' attention for 5 seconds so I could try to get this information into them that they could care less about, right? She's like, we don't need that. The attention and the desire and the curiosity for knowledge comes from these living books.
I wrote that in here. I've spent so much time you have to spend so much time if you use another way to educate, being on. You're on.
It's exhausting.
Okay, we're going to do this. I'm going to throw this in. Right, this is fun. And I'm worn out by the time this is over. It's just not necessary. And there are times we do some super exciting things, right? Of course. But even the way, once you get into it, so I do want to say the narration is a muscle, right? But even as you grow into it, your children's narration muscles will begin to invite more exciting things. And it reminds me of even like playing the piano. My daughter takes piano lesson. And so when she started, she looked at the books and like, this is so boring. She's been taking for 3 years. So she was 13 and she's looking at ding, 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 ding. One. She's like, this is like, you don't understand. You are developing your muscles. So now this year, when she started, she has these beautiful chords. She's up and down, arpeggios, all this stuff. And so your children's narration muscles will grow into that. I mean, even today, I want to give an example. So my Form 2, the Junior Book of Science, and it's about weather. So when we started, she never would have given me this kind of narration. But today, she wanted to act out what a tornado looks like. And, you know, you could see the muscles. She's like, I want to do a weather. I want to act like a meteorologist, and I want to show what a tornado. You know, she's really into it, and I heard all the connections that she made through all these parts of the language arts components. But this did not come on day one. So the things that she's talking about here, the delight, the lovely, glorious books, you put that in front of them, and these other things will grow.
Yes, that's a very good point.
It will grow.
Yeah. And that's why it's important to know the philosophy, right? To have that vision for the long term. Because at first, the narrations were like, oh my gosh, they're not getting anything out of this. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? You know, you do have, like you said, to build that muscle. I love that piano analogy. That is perfect. And I could totally see your daughter acting it out. And she talks about that in here too, how the narration will show their personality. It'll be unique. You know, and I get that question all the time too. What happens if I'm reading the book to, 2 or 3 different kids? Are their narrations all going to be the same? Are they going to copy? I'm like, maybe at first, but I mean, my kids are so different. Their narrations one is like very serious and very practical, and she would tell you all about the science of the tornado. And then I have another one who would totally be like that, running around the house acting like a tornado, So like they make it their own. Once they build the confidence that I can do this, I will be heard, I will not be criticized, I will not be questioned. What I say is important, and they build that confidence, and then they start making like those deeper and deeper connections from their narrations. And she talks about that in here, how children delight in it. And so, I get questions of, well, my kids hate narration. And I was like, well, you might be putting too much pressure on them, because they shouldn't. They should really like it. They should realize I can make this my own. I can stand up on the table with a plastic sword and act out this battle, and that's okay.
And the more comfortable you are with understanding the why, I think confidence you get in making it more personal and tailor making narration and the other parts to your children. If you're just not, until you get a little confidence, maybe you think maybe they shouldn't be acting this out with puppets, or maybe they should be. Once you start to get more confidence in the why of it and really grasping that, then you're able to allow that flexibility to pour over to your own children. And that's so, because there are some days my kids don't give great narrations. Okay. I mean, I want to.
Well, like she says about in here, right? That the child is going to take what they need, their minds need for that day. They'll reject the rest. Yeah.
Right. When I started this one book, I don't really like this. I'm like, doesn't matter. We're sticking with it. And her narrations weren't great. But then you come today and it was this, she gets what a tornado is. I totally get it. So it's allowing that flexibility, why the education of the parent is so important.
That's a really important. I love what she also says here. Now I'm really mad that the pages are mixed. So I'm going to like renumber this other book so I can.
It's okay.
We'll have the pink ones, but just so you all know, she says it was vain to urge that the homeschoolroom does not usually produce remarkable educational results. Let me say that again. It is vain to urge that the homeschoolroom does not usually produce remarkable educational results. So just rest in that, that through her studies, through her observations, the homeschooling was the best place. And then she was on to say, she's showing that her philosophy also works in schools, but she's saying, well, homeschools just by themselves are going to produce remarkable results. Add this to it.
Yes.
Ooh, right? Amazing.
Powerful that you're putting into the hands of your children.
And that, this philosophy was made to be used in the home. So it's so different. There's no other one out there like that. Like, she saw the value and how remarkable homeschooling was. So I think that's something important to know as well about it, if you're not familiar with that she did write her philosophy for homeschools. Another interesting point in the second section here is that I also get asked, like, okay, if the student is responsible for their own education, is this a child-led philosophy? And
Yes.
it's not, okay? So she said, no stray lessons are given on interesting subjects. The knowledge the children gets is consecutive. Now, you know, both you and me, Jay, like we like to go on some rabbit trails, right? But that doesn't mean, and that's totally fine, but that doesn't mean it's not consecutive. The things we're playing out and we're doing those, and if there's extra time, we can go research, you know, watch some tornado hunters on YouTube or whatever we have time or the interest for, right? But it's not, oh, what do you want to learn about today? Oh, you want to learn about tornadoes? Okay, let me go find some stuff on tornadoes. Oh, now you want to learn about something else? Like, I mean, it's not child-led. It is consecutive and planned out, but the children are the responsible parties for doing that active learning themselves. That's the difference.
And I think I've seen in my own life through the years when I've more frustrated, when I've become frustrated, it's because I am either trying to make it more child-led. Oh, well, they're not interested in this, so maybe, or I want to start taking things back into my own hands. Those are two.
Oh, it's so hard, isn't it?
Well, that public school teacher girl sort of starts to rise up and like, oh, you're not doing enough. You should be planning a lesson around this. And what happens ultimately is there might be a few that are hits, but normally what happens is when I'm trying to do these, you know, stray lessons, my kids are not interested because this is not a connection they made. And I've done all this work, and I'm frustrated. I'm like, what do you mean you don't want to make a tower of whatever out of all these things that I've got? That what do you mean you don't want to do a art lesson on, you know? And they're not involved. They're not attending because it's a stray lesson.
Right. Yes.
So that brings frustration, and we do get a lot of questions about that, like where are the hands-on activities, where are the, and I think people are looking for stray lessons sometimes where those things all do come in, but they're all tied to the things that we're already reading, the consecutive lessons connected to the narrations that they get from the books that they're reading.
Yeah, that's true. And I love this quote. You should like put it on a pillow or something. Whereby teachers shall teach less and scholars shall learn more. That's what you're talking about. That. You gotta take a lot of that pressure off of you.
Yes.
Oh, you're gonna make me a pillow?
Yes, I will embroider you a pillow. Would you like that for Christmas?
Yes, that'd be great. And so it does take that pressure off, but it also does take a tremendous amount of faith and trust in the philosophy. And that's, again, why it's so important to kind of know why you're doing what you're doing. And especially if you are, you know, former teacher, it really is hard to give that up and teach less, especially, you know, you've just been trained to do that. So it is very different in that. And so, you know, she reiterates that continually. And I think it's important for us to kind of embrace that. And you'll see here, she also is kind of part of her philosophy is that this works for all children. You know, again, this time in England after World War I, I mean, you still have the class system is very strong and entrenched in this belief that people of certain classes are born more intelligent than children of other classes. And she's saying, no, all children, no matter their class, can learn and learn, you know, Bacon's essays and Pilgrim's Progress, these really hard things, right? That this philosophy works for all children. Okay, so do you have anything else on section 2 before we go to section 3?
Covered only just to really encourage people on their own time to sit down and go over this A through J. I think it is so important. And just sit down with each one and just sort of think through it with your own personal family in mind. Like, okay, how am I doing on this particular thing? You know, am I like, am I being more responsible? How much self-effort am I allowing my children to have? You know, am I letting the scholars do the work? Just going through those things, I think, is such a great way to sort of gauge maybe where you're being frustrated, where you could strengthen the way that you're allowing these philosophy methods to play out in your own homeschool. That's really helpful for me to do time to time. So those things in this one little area.
Yeah, because those are really hitting the highlights here. So yeah, A through J, go through all those and kind of, think through those as well. Good, all right. So then in section 3 here, she gets into the meat. So I don't know, I guess it's a really big section, but let's just take it kind of page by page here. So she gives, and I'm sure you've heard this before, so, but this, again, this is for a philosophy for all children. She says, the scheme is carried out in less time than ordinary schoolwork on the same subjects. There are no revisions, no evening lessons, no cramming or getting up of subjects. Therefore, there's much time, whether for vocational work or interests or hobbies. All intellectual work is done in the morning hours, and the afternoons are given to nature study, drawing, handicrafts, etc. No work is required.
Right. That's just basically a great summary right there.
Yep.
What does your day look like?
Mm-hmm.
That's what our day looks like right there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just simple, easy. Just this is what we do. No, and I think we do have a lot of people who have younger children, but I want to make this point where she says there's much time, whether for vocational work or interests or hobbies. This is really important for children. And
yes, thank you for bringing that up.
Yes, I hope people will stick with this method as their children get older, because they're able to get their lessons done in a small amount of time. And then it's really important for those older children. I mean, I have a Form 4 at home right now, a 10th grader. She has plenty of time in the afternoon to work on things she's interested in. She has a little side hustle, a little job that she does. She has time for that. That if we burdened her with a lot of work that's just not necessary, she would not have time for that. So she can really grow. And also, this is something, I have 3 that I've gotten into college now. So I will say this: colleges are looking for this sort of thing, this well-rounded.
I 100% agree with you. Yes, it's not just here's my GPA, my SAT score. It's like, no, I did this and I was in this, and
Right. What kind of time do you have for volunteer work? What kind of time have you had to actually pursue something that you're interested in, excel? And we're able to she does a lot of schoolwork in the morning, but she's able to be done and really pursue those things. So that is not a small small thing there. It's really important the older that they get.
Yeah, that's extremely important. And it's not like they're not getting a lot either. It's not like, oh, we have these little short lessons and then no, they're still getting this really rich, deep upper high school level education. But because there aren't these revisions and all this extra fill in the blank worksheets and all the other stuff they have to do with it, they're able to get through much faster. And they, by that point, right, they know that, okay, there's only so much time. If I want to get done, I'm going to read it, I'm going to narrate it, I'm not going to keep going back, so I have to pay attention. I have to do that single reading. And she talks about that and this introduction as well.
Very, very efficient for a high school student to be educated this way.
Yes, I 100% agree. And then she kind of goes on, again, like I was kind of alluding to before, about how she kind of got this philosophy. And, she says, I had an elementary school and a pioneer church high school at the same time, so that I was enabled to study children in large groups. But at school, children are not so self-revealing as at home. So she had lived with a family that had children, and she was observing them. So she was observing children in her school. She was teaching teachers in her house of education on how to be governesses or how to work in these schools. And I thought, how much of the educational testing that, the experts come out with how children learn is done in a school artificial setting where they're with about 20 some kids of their own age and not actually seeing the children as a person. So they don't know what they're doing at home or any other time in their life, right?
It's not a picture of the whole person. It's just one little piece of that person that's in that social and educational setup. And she says over and over again in this volume and many others, we are educating the whole person. And so that's what's so effective, is that she did watch them as a whole person and then develop this as a whole person. And so educating them as a whole person.
Correct. Yes. And she was trying to teach them English grammar and realized like they were just like, and kind of then developed the theory of, that the child's mind will take or reject according to its needs. And then she goes on to kind of, in the next couple of chapters, kind of break down what she means by the mind here. So she's saying, just as the body needs food and needs sustenance, I can talk, children need to be fed upon ideas. She says explanations, questioning, amplifications are unnecessary and wearisome. Children have a natural appetite for knowledge, but she says traditional schooling, we train them out of having that desire for knowledge because they can't, right? It's like, this is what we're learning. Everybody needs to learn it. We need to learn it right now. You have a question, so I don't have time for that. Like, it's trained out of them. My teacher will tell me what's important when we read this thing. I don't have to do the hard work of thinking through what was important out of this thing she just read. I'll wait for her to tell me or question me, so I know it's important, that kind of thing. She's saying all of that, she's talking about the apparatus of the teacher, a vivid presentation, illustrations. I'm thinking of today with all of the technology and like the bells and whistles. She says those are actually hindrances to the child getting the mental kind of food and the ideas that they need from their education. What are your thoughts on kind of the mind here that she goes a lot more pages here on it?
Yeah, it's so, this desire of knowledge or curiosity is the chief instrument of education. Page, and that's what she's talking about. I love that she makes this, she really honors the mind of the student, which I think is, when we just, like we talked about before, we're trying to entertain them so that they'll grab, let's use a puppet, let's use a poster, let's play a game. We're trying to entertain them. That doesn't honor this desire of knowledge and curiosity that they have. She says they bring imagination, judgment, and the various so-called faculties. They're bringing these things of their own personality to the page, to the lesson, to the reading. If we will honor and respect that, that they bring something to them. And I do think that children, they notice when you're not. I used to teach at a co-op, and we did almost all my lessons as Charlotte Mason style lessons. And every once in a while I would throw in something that what she's talking about here with these vivid presentations and illustrations and stuff. And when I did, because those students were used to, in that small group setting, being respected by what they brought, they would give me that look like, what are you doing? We don't need that. What are you doing? Yeah. And I think when you back off at first, it's like, ooh, taking the training wheels off. What if I don't have a poster? What if I don't have a game? What if I don't have an activity? What if I back off? Then what you will see is your children you'll see that imagination they bring to it. Like I was talking about narration earlier. You'll see that they bring their own judgment. You'll see that they bring their own faculties. But we do have to take off the training wheels of some of these things that are unnecessary and wearisome, that can be what we're used to do.
Right. Yeah. So we need to take that off. She talks about the questions, the presentation. She talks about prizes and other things to kind of manipulate, to drive a child to want to read a book, that kind of horrible things. And then she goes, we're not going to do these things. Here's what we need to do instead. And that's where she brings in, again, this concept of living books. They need to read worthy books, many worthy books, many, that things need to be in literary form. She talks about how, desultory? I should look this word up. How do you pronounce that word?
Where you are, I'm lost.
Desultory? You can see how I'm really educated.
I
She always uses words I don't know how to pronounce, but reading is delightful and incidentally profitable, but it's not education whose concern is knowledge. And here what we say was like the twaddly books, right? They can be entertaining, they can be delightful, but and she's saying they're delightful, they have a place, right? But they don't bring the knowledge that we're seeking, okay? The mind here needs these well-worthy books. They need to be in contact, she says, with these great minds, because we want them to have great thoughts. They have to be put in contact with the people that wrote great thoughts and had these great minds, and to think that for themselves. And again, she says, our minds aren't just a physical thing, like we can weigh it, we can measure it. Like, we are spiritual beings, and as such, we need to be fed, like you're saying, these ideas and have this kind of imagination.
And I think she talks about where you were reading, she says we must read in order to know. And so that is a concept that you are.
Right, can you say that again? You kind of cut out.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. With that, we're reading in order to know.
Okay.
that's something that we are teaching our children. And when people say, well, this curriculum is just reading a bunch of books. No, we're not just sitting around reading a bunch of books. We're reading in order to know, which is a big, big difference. And you do train your child that way as you just keep giving them these books that you're talking about that actually feed their minds. They start to recognize, okay, we're reading to know. And one thing that's funny is I take my daughter to the library with me once a week, and used to, she would only go to the fun books, the fun section for the fun.
Yeah. Where those covers are cute. Yeah.
And I have no problem with that. I mean, that's her library. I don't care what she, they're to and a point. She can read whatever she wants during her free reading time. But what I have found out is the more that they go through now, where she goes, she likes to go to the autobiographies or the biography. She likes to go to the books that are on a topic, on a subject. She, on her own time, is starting to read to know.
Yes. Yes.
Starting to grasp that. I didn't have to sit down and give her a lesson about that, but because the overarching number of books that we use are books that you read to know.
Yes.
That she starts to have an appetite for that herself. And over time. So.
Yes, for sure. And again, she talks again about, the importance of a single reading here. She's thinking, okay, how are we going to do this? And so she's, again, through her observations, she tested her methods, having a living book, having a single reading, and having them do a narration. And then just seeing how, and she says, they have little trouble with spelling or composition and become well-informed, intelligent persons. So through her observation of using these methods, and using them, it's very simple here. She's seeing these amazing results. I love, and I have to get the page numbers right here, but she says, if you want to test this, read Boswell, Jane Austen, or one of Lamb's essays. Narrate it to yourself, and then go to bed. And see if you can tell someone. It's so simple, right? If you can explain something to somebody, you know it. If you can't, someone asks you, how do you change the oil in your car? I wouldn't be able to tell you because I don't know how, right? But if you do, you can explain it. So if I know about Jane Austen's life or something like that, I should be able to talk to you about it. And so it's such a simple concept, but our children should be able to do the same thing. Otherwise, they don't know it. And she goes on to kind of contrast her philosophy with a traditional kind of memory work approach. She says, this is not memory work, because in order to memorize, you're just going through something over and over and over again, right? Your mind doesn't necessarily possess that knowledge. It can, short-term memory, it stays right there and it's gone, right? You haven't made it you haven't made it part of your person, you haven't acted out like a tornado, right? When you do those things, then it becomes a part of you.
And the quote that she has on that page 16 in this volume says, the mind can know nothing save what it can produce in the form of an answer to a question put to the mind by itself. And that is such a powerful concept, because sometimes even in narrations, I'll say to my children, especially if they're stuck, like, okay, they're just stuck. I'll even say to them, okay, ask yourself 3 questions that you know from that passage. Ask yourself 3 questions. Say it out loud. Okay, what did this character do? Okay, I can answer that. What came, because in memory work, it's just this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing. I put it in. I have no power of connection to, oh, okay, well, this went with this. This person did this. And yesterday. So there is a big difference. And we do get a lot of questions about that. Like, what's the difference between reading these books and narrating and them just memorizing something? So, and there's quite a difference in the brain power that goes between those two things.
Yes. And she actually says memorizing weakens your power of attention, because you're looking at that same thing over and over and over again, rather than, she says, with the single reading, it creates, she says, a must act in the child. They know that they have to pay attention because they're only going to hear just one time. And then this is what is required of them. So it gives them the kind of that motivation of, this is the expectation. I can't just keep going back and looking for answers and be lazy.
Yes. And expectation is something you have to set up. You know, you set that up with your child. That's a habit that comes in your homeschool. Okay, I expect this of you. And you just, and once again, if you're not confident that that expectation of a single reading and a narration, if you're not confident, like, oh, is this really working? If you're not confident in that, it's hard to really stick with it because it almost seems too simple. But if you're really confident that this expectation of a single reading in a short lesson and a narration, if you're confident that is really working in their brain and really forming connections and really is difficult to do, I mean, try it. You know,
Yeah.
if you try it, it can be hard to do. Then if you're not confident in that, it's very easy to have a big question mark. Oh, maybe I should be doing more. Maybe this isn't working. It's hard to stick with it. But and I do think that she says here, this is a good point that we get a lot of questions about on page 17. If it is desirable to ask questions in order to emphasize certain points, these should be asked after and not before or during the act of narration. So there's an answer to a question we get a lot of. What do I do if they missed it? You know, what do I do if I feel like they didn't cover what they needed to? Then you can ask those questions, but let them get that good narration in, give them time, and then you can go back.
Right. And oftentimes what you think is important necessarily isn't what they think is important, and that's okay.
Yep.
Yes,
Mama has to back off and say,
yeah,
I didn't get what I got, but that wasn't what they needed to get today.
Because you're not them, right? Yeah.
Right.
And then I wish you would have numbered these, but she goes, kind of has another list again. This is briefly how it works. A child's a person. They need knowledge to nourish their minds. This knowledge, child is born with it. It's curiosity, right? Yes. They grow in that through imagination, reflection, judgment. The knowledge, in most cases, needs to be in literary form. They reproduce this knowledge in their own original narrations here. It's very natural. They don't need a lot of stimulus for it. They have a right to the best books, the best. They're weary of talk. They bore of questions. They have a great variety of knowledge. So it's not just a bunch of history books that they're giving them, right? These books and these literary forms come in many different subjects here. Science, art, a wide feast.
Right.
The teacher can give direction, sympathy, a vivifying word here or there. I love that.
Love that.
And help in making experiments, teaching languages, setting up science experiments, teaching math. So it's not like a teacher is just sitting there eating bonbons. So you're doing a lot. And so there, she kind of just, again, this is briefly how it works, kind of hitting on some of the highlights to kind of remind everybody there. And then she says something that I've heard people kind of go back and forth on. So you tell me your thoughts, Shay, and I'll say my thoughts here. So let me read the quote and you tell me what you think. The reader will say with truth, I knew all this before and have always acted more or less on these principles. And I can only point to the unusual results we obtained through adhering not more or less, but strictly to the principles and practices I have indicated. And then she talks about Lister with the surgery equipment, like, I more or less cleaned that surgical tool that I used on you. Like, you don't want your surgeon saying that to you, right?
Right. Yeah.
You want to be very thorough.
It'd be nice if this was disinfected, not just dipped in the soapy.
Yeah. I cleaned it off a couple days ago. It's fine. So I've heard that. Okay, well, you tell me, what are your thoughts on that? And I'll go.
I do think that and adhering to the principles is what keeps us going for over the long term. I also think, though, that real life happens. And we have to realize that even though, for instance, I mean, we've just gone through, we had a death in our family, over the past few weeks. So have I stuck exactly to what the principles have been and exactly the feast and been able to provide all that stuff in the past few weeks? Not exactly, but that's a short time period. So do we pretty much stick to the principles? Yes, we do, in the practices. And I think when I get away from that, it's because I'm questioning myself. And so that's when I go back and I need to reread, remind myself, and it brings us back to peace. The simplicity of what she offers us is why it's something that you can do over the long haul.
Yes.
And
Correct.
sticking to it
Yeah.
pretty strictly is where I think what's made me be able to homeschool for 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the times I've been frustrated are the times I'm like, oh, well, maybe I ought to try this, or maybe I ought to branch out from this brand. And ultimately, it's led to my frustration or their frustration, even if I think it's going fabulously.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? What are you thinking?
Well, I definitely noticed that. Like when I first started, I was kind of doing Charlotte Mason more or less because I didn't really understand it, right? And so I just bought some stuff that had Charlotte Mason's name on it, and I was trying to mix some of her methods with traditional, like multiple choice, fill in the blank, reading comprehension questions, and these living books, and a little bit of narration. And yeah, it was horrible. So, we weren't getting what she was saying, these results in this beautiful education. And I'm like, this doesn't work, right? Well, I was doing it more or less. Okay. So I realized that. And I do feel like that's why it's so important what we're doing and really understanding what she actually said. But then I've also heard this quote used for people who are like, you need to do everything by the book and dot all the T's, dot all the I's and cross your T's. And if you don't do every single subject exactly the way Charlotte Mason said, then you're not doing Charlotte Mason at all.
No.
And I'm going to get on my little soapbox here and say that's
real life.
Because she's saying here, adhering to the principles and practices I have indicated. Okay, that was that list that I just read to you.
Yes.
That list that I just read to you didn't say you must do nature study for 3 hours every week, and you must do a hike one day and a journaling one day, and you must do the painting outside. And if you're not doing that, then you're not. I don't even know. I'm just making stuff up. You're not doing it right. Or it is anything in here about Plutarch or Sofa or any of these other things. And if you don't do those subjects, then you're not doing Charlotte Mason, right? All it said was adhering to the principles I have indicated. Okay, what did she just indicate in that big long list?
Yes.
A child's a person. A child needs knowledge. A child gets it in literary form. A child reproduces it through narration. The teacher stops talking, stays out of the way. I mean, are you doing those things?
Right.
And not mixing that with other methods? Then you are doing it. You are strictly adhering rather than doing it more or less. And I think that's when you'll see the results that you want, but that doesn't mean it's this legalistic, purist, put you in a box and suffocate you kind of approach.
And that's so important for people's confidence, I think, to hear what you're saying to them, is to give them the flexibility to make this work for their family. I mean, we had a lady, this has been a while back, on the Facebook group, and she said something about, I can't do tea time. I have all boys. There's just no way I can do tea time. I'm like, don't call it tea time. Go buy everybody a superhero mug and call it superhero snack time.
Yeah.
It doesn't. If you understand the philosophy,
and Charlotte Mason didn't even have tea time. I mean, she had tea every day because she was British, but like.
but I'm saying, you're putting these expectations on yourself that take every bit of the joy out of it. And
Yes.
when you really understand the philosophy, it's the simplicity of it that allows you to have the flexibility. But I really, really would love for everybody that even considers using Charlotte Mason to sit down with those 2 pages we talked about before, and then these pages 18 and 19 in this book. And if you just took a little time with those 2 sections, you would be able to, I really think, take a deep breath and say, I can make this look like what it needs to look like in my family. Definitely not the legalistic sort of idea. And I haven't heard a whole lot of that, but I hope nobody would feel that sort of pressure, because I think it'd take the joy right out of what she meant for it to be in your homeschool. That's no fun.
No, not at all. I don't think you hear that, because that's really something I feel very strongly about. But I've heard from other people that they tried Charlotte Mason, they were burnt out, they couldn't do everything, so they just gave up the whole thing. I'm like, whoa. Like, wait, what? Come back. And she does say education is slack and uncertain for the lack of sound principles exactly applied. So that's why it's so important to know these principles. But these principles are different than methods. So these are the principles. Do you understand these principles? And are you applying those for different things, rather than every little method for every little subject, following it all exactly how she said to do it. And like, yeah, like you said, like tea time wasn't even something she had. I just put that in a general feast because it's a good way to end your day. Like, and it worked for my family. Like, it's not, again, it's what is working for you, but what's the principle behind that? Well, we're going to read good living books and we're going to enjoy each other's company. And,
we're going to put some poetry in that is going
to. I mean, she read poetry to them. She read great living books to them. The end. Like, that's the principle. How you do that is whatever works for you guys. And then, like you said, she goes back to this kind of and wraps it all together here of why this philosophy is so important, how it worked, and how it can lead to the kind of people that, you know, she feels like, and I think we all agree, right? These well-educated people who could think for themselves. And she said, children educated upon such lines as these respond in a surprising way, developing capacity, character, countenance, initiative, and a sense of responsibility. They are, in fact, even as children, good and thoughtful citizens.
I love that so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, you know, you once said, I remember when I first started homeschooling and we would go to these homeschooling conventions, I would look at these parents with older children and I would want to chase them all down, you know, and be like, oh, how did you, you know, what did you do to get them into high school where they are, whatever these things are, capacity, character, count. They have the things. What did you do? What did you do? And so when we're thinking, she says to us, we start with the end. We start with what we want at the end. And we back all the way up. How do we get to that end? These are the principles that we follow to get to that end. And we just wake up every day and we do those things every day. We implement them, like you said, not more or less, but adhering to them every day. Then the days go by a lot faster than we ever expect them to. And then this is what a beautiful outcome that we have educating our children this way.
Yeah, and exactly what you said. What is the outcome? So she says, the proper outcome is stability of mind. That's the being able to, you know, make good decisions, to think clearly, to identify fallacies in thinking, to have those beautiful thoughts, and magnanimity of character.
I
love that word. It's so fun. You can impress all your friends with it because most people don't use it. Why are you homeschooling? So my child would be magnanimous.
Okay.
No, people are like, what? You know, if you don't use that word on a regular basis,
then they won't ask you any more questions. So if you say, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, me too.
You don't know what that means, but we're not going to admit that. Yeah, it means, you know, a person who is kind, a person who's generous, a person who thinks deep thoughts on a variety of subjects, who has this, like she talks about, you set their feet in this wide room. They have this expansive knowledge and they have that desire and curiosity still. We haven't killed it out of them to know more. As they grow, they want to keep learning and growing. And they're those self-learners and they're responsible people. But she said that's the proper outcome of education, is the stability of mind and being a magnanimous person. And so then she gives us an approach throughout the rest of this book on how to do that. So have we come up with like a reading plan yet? Or will you do that for everybody?
No, I can post that. I'll post that tomorrow or later this afternoon. We'll go through and I'll let you help me decide what you want to do, how much you want to cover. But I really want to encourage everybody out there to, even if you don't have the time to, you know, read ahead, at least listen to, maybe the next month you want to cover the introduction after you listen to this.
Yeah, right.
You want to read after, but that time on your own will not be wasted.
Catherine said, I'm so thankful you were doing these. Well, I'm so thankful that you were able to join us. And yeah, so the replay will live on Facebook. I'm going to try to put it everywhere. YouTube, Instagram, podcast, like just to get this in as many people's hands as possible, because I think it is so, so vital that everybody kind of has this basic foundation. Yeah, so we're going to do lots of this. So you'll be able to find it all over the place. But but every month I would love to have a live. I'm going to try to make it more of an interactive webinar kind of format so people can have their questions and we can kind of interact with people. But for today, I'm just happy we got this.
I know, I was impressed with that.
Technology working, but yes, we will work on that in the future. So do you have any closing thoughts, Jay, before we wrap up here?
Only to say, to reiterate what I said before, is that, you know, my heart is that families would walk forward in confidence that what you're doing is important work that works. And that it's so much more than, I've had asked, if you stop on a homeschooling family and say, what philosophy do you use? A lot of them are going to say, well, we use, and they're going to fill in the blank and name
the textbooks, right? Yeah.
Right. They're going to say we use, and they're going to name it a curriculum. But when you take the time and make the effort to follow this philosophy, it is really going to impact the peace in your home, the peace you have in your heart about what you're doing for homeschooling, and put something really powerful in the hands of your children. So my heart's really just for families to walk forward with confidence. And that's why we really want to do this. That's really important.
Yes, for sure. And one last thing, there is Charlotte Mason Plenary. I showed at the beginning of it, the annotated version, but she also has an audiobook where she reads it. So I feel like with Charlotte Mason stuff, I need to read it because there's lots of big words, like I said, rather than listen to it. But if you're just like, I cannot sit and find the time, and it's really short. I mean, we're going to do short little sections here.
Yes.
I just want, or, I mean, there's people with sight issues or whatever that, there is an audio version of this book on Charlotte Mason Plenary's website that you can purchase to listen to as well. So thank you everyone for joining us live, and if you're watching this on the replay, thank you for, just taking the time, because I think this is so vital and important, and I hope it encourages you and kind of gives you some more direction as we kind of dive into this. But yes, next time, hopefully we'll be more interactive. I do want to hear from you guys what your questions are. So, when we have the readings, if you're going to read ahead, let us know what your questions are so we can answer those as well. So.